specific media organization on a exclusive basis. So I used to have a production company, and I would produce reports for a lot of media organizations. Mostly Al Jazeera English is who I've worked for the past maybe 15 years or so. But I've also worked for Sky, Rai, and other media. So I'm here today to explain somehow how an independent investigative report or documentary is produced. And then, so I'm going to explain a little bit about that, and then you can ask me questions, and if I know the answer, I will be glad to answer them. So first of all, I saw that the topic this year of this festival is power and the many faces of power, and Kratos, which is the son of Zeus, and this, the symbol somehow of this power. So what does power mean today, and how does it relate to the work that we do as journalists? And then if I understand you guys are interested in the diplomatic career, but maybe some of you might choose to take a different path and become journalists. And that's why I'm here. So what is power today? It's because in the modern world, I'm sure you guys know, power isn't just the military, economic, or political power, but today there is the power of persuasion, you could say. It's a different kind of power, which is wielded mostly by multinational corporations. And what do they? What is their power of persuasion? Is to persuade you that such a story is true, or of a certain kind of truth, or persuade you to buy a certain kind of product, or you know, a lot of different things. We have a lot of inputs from the social media, and you know, I'm sure you guys know this stuff better than I do. So how do we? Some journalists are the watchdogs of democracy, somebody said. So we're supposed to look beyond this kind of power and somehow find the truth in things, so that we can inform you know, the general public on what actually happens around them, since we get all of these fake news and you know, all of these stories that are somehow unverified, and you know, people believe them just because they have a huge following, or you know, they're told on big media and everything. I'm gonna sit down. So what we do as journalists, as investigative journalists, is mostly look back at the old school and try to do our job in the traditional way. So what does that mean? That means that you don't just copy and paste or take for granted something that you've been told, but you go out and you ring doorbells, you make phone calls, you meet people, and you don't take any truth for granted. That's something that in our profession is done less and less, because in the modern world, you don't have the time sometimes to go out and verify something that you read or that you've been told. But that's the way to fight this kind of power. You get a pair of comfy shoes and you go out there into the real world and you go bother people, and you know, you get them out of their house and you speak to them and you verify everything that you're going to put in your story. So, but I guess maybe you might be more interested in finding out you know, how exactly an investigative documentary gets produced. So that's what I'm going to explain right now. What you need to do first is find a story, of course, you know, and do a lot of research. The investigative journalists spend 90% of their time in front of a computer, reading stuff. Okay. You know, the sources are very important. So once you have a story in mind, you go out there and try to get documents. I mean, documents are the primary source of information. What do I mean by documents? I mean court documents, police documents, everything that's legally considered the truth on a certain story. So first of all, you try to get that and you read it over and over and you jot down all the names and addresses of all the people that you might be interested in speaking to. Once you've done that, you develop a proposal. What does that mean? I mean, you find an angle of the story that's not been told or that's been overlooked, and you write a pitch. You know, you write a proposal saying, you know, this is my story, this is what I want to tell. And at the same time, you have to find somebody who might be interested in the story, because unless you own a network, you're not going to be able to air your story by yourself. So you got to find a media outlet that's willing to take that story and put it on the air. So you'll have to find maybe a particular program. I've been producing documentary program called People in Power for many years, which airs on Al Jazeera English. And it's an investigative documentary program, but there's a lot of them, you know, in all the networks around the world. So you have a quite, you know, ample choice of where to pitch your story. What you need to do is find out who the head of the program that you're interested in it is, and or who the commissioning editor, or, you know, somebody who might have the power to decide that your story is a good story and it can be run on the network. So what you do is you pitch the proposal to them. Now, if they're interested, they'll ask you to develop it. Okay. So you don't want to pitch like a 30-page story to somebody, because these people receive a lot of proposals. They're not going to sit there and read something that's, you know, too long. So you want to keep it short and get to the point of what you want to tell right away. And then if they're interested, they'll ask you to develop that and you write something longer, maybe including what your exclusive sources might be, or where you go looking for the information, or even, you know, how you're going to shoot it. We're talking television, of course. But if you're pitching to a newspaper or a magazine, it's pretty much the same, apart from the video stuff. So now, if this developed proposal is still deemed interesting, they will ask you for a budget. Okay, so you're going to have to sit down and figure out what you need to shoot the story, to shoot the documentary. This is usually it's separated into different phases, because you've got the development part where you might have to travel around and you know, go find people and speak to them, and then you've got the actual production part where you go out and shoot interviews, you know, get archive, write the story. And then there is the post-production, which is, you know, the editing, where you'll sit there and actually, you know, write a speaker, usually, you know, a narrating voice, and choose the bits and pieces of the interviews that you need to tell your story. So you're going to put all of that together, you know, with an editor. And at one point, you'll have a rough cut. Rough cut is basically the entire story, not finished, but it already will give the network an idea of what your film is like. What happens then is, you know, you'll show that to the head of the program, and the head of the program will probably make changes or ask you to remove something or to add something. And, you know, these are usually people that have a lot of experience that can help you, you know, tell the story the right way so it's understandable. And so you know, so it fits the strand or the kind of programs that they air. You'll also usually have to speak to a lawyer if you're talking investigative journalism, because legal is very important, especially nowadays. The networks are very much afraid of saying something that will land them in court. So, you know, the lawyer will go over the entire script and ask you and tell you, oh, you're saying this. Do you have the documents to back this up? So you'll have to do that too. And then once you've gone, I mean, once you have, you know, this rough cut has been deemed good by the network, you sit with the editor, add the musics, you know, and do the refining and end up with a fine cut. Fine cut is basically what gets aired, you know, in the end. So that's more or less how it works, how you put together the pieces of a documentary, of an investigative documentary. Of course, you can't do this by yourself. You're going to need a filmmaker. You're going to need a sound designer. You're going to need an editor. You're going to need probably somebody to do the graphics, you know, and a bunch of other people that can be useful. If you have a big crew, you might want to have a separate producer that organizes the logistics and everything. That's more or less how it works. So, do you guys have any questions? Okay, let's start by, since you're in the front.
Okay, I'm Pietro Bagnasco, and I wanted to ask you, this is not really related to like what you just said. It's more about journalism in general. I wanted to ask you, right now, more and more journalists are leaving traditional media, deeming them useless, basically. Nothing more than a baking that's less relevant to more and more people. And they are opening YouTube channels or newsletters to have an independent voice, basically, and do things on their own. This is leading to atomization of journalism. And with every single journalist that speaks to a very close group of people, basically. How do you think this trend that is losing the collective and the community aspect of journalism will impact how we perceive journalism and knowledge and learning about the news?
Okay. You know, journalism is not like mathematics. It's not an exact science. So it can change over time, the way it's done. But there are some things that remain and stay and that are important. And basically, it's what I said before, you know, go out there and touch things with your own hands and figure out what the truth is. The atomization, how you said, of the media today, I think is a positive thing, because whereas in the past, newspapers were owned by people who were interested in journalism, nowadays they're not. They're owned by corporations who have other interests, and they're just part of you know, an apparatus that's used to somehow forge public opinion. So a lot of times, big networks might not be so interested in somebody who is too free or independent in their thinking. But that's not always the truth. I mean, I've worked, like I said, with Al Jazeera English for many years, and they've never told me you can't say this or you have to say that. I've never seen that happen, at least in my experience. But yes, I think that small independent media are a good thing for democracy and for journalism, because they allow people to have a voice outside of the traditional channels. Well, that's my opinion. Thank you.
I think you've partially already answered, but I'll ask anyway. Yesterday we met a journalist, which was in prison for 6 years for having exposed certain sensitive information about the Iranian government. So I would like to know if you have ever found out some sensitive information that you thought was important to share, but at the end you did not share it because you had to reach like a certain compromise with people, or because it couldn't be shared at all? And if so, how did you feel about that? Because it could like be in contrast with your own values as a person.
Well, I've never had, world-shattering information about governments that I didn't share, simply because I was never told, like I said, you can't say this or you can't say that. There are some instances, however, while going through legal with the network, I was told, this might not be a good or sensible way to convey this information because we'll get sued, and that happens. And sometimes, somebody may tell you something that is true and you verified it, but you don't have the concrete elements that can prove that 100%. And in that case, the network might tell you, it's better not to say this or say this in a different way. So no, I think if I land on a piece of information that's really important for the public to know, I will say it no matter what. That's the bottom line.
Hello, I'm Diego Del Valle. I wanted to ask, if you worked with Rai, if you know the guys from Report, from Sigfrido Ranucci and his staff, if you ever happen to work with them, and in general, what do you think of the landscape of Italian investigative journalism?
Oh, that's a tough question. I don't personally know Sigfrido Ranucci and the people from Report. I may have met somebody who's worked there, yes. I've never worked with them. As a matter of fact, I've always worked as an independent. So I've never really worked for these programs. What do I think of the Italian investigative journalism landscape? Report is a good program. Although there's a lot of political tensions in Italy for everything that a journalist might say, because it's always perceived as being, of the left or of the right, or, having other, purposes other than informing. So I think that the Italian journalistic landscape is pretty messed up, because Report is pretty much the only investigative journalism program that's worth watching here in Italy at the moment. In the past, there was a lot. Rai too did a lot of investigative stuff. Rai had TG2 dossier, Telefono Giallo. There were a lot of programs, investigative programs. There were very good, great investigative journalists like Giuseppe Marrazzo. I mean, it's the fact that Rai is populated by a bunch of political figures that are named by the designated by the government is, of course, not a very good thing for freedom of information. That's what I think.
I wanted to ask a question. Hello, my name is Mislava. In the year 2020, Al Jazeera posted around 3 pieces, if I'm not mistaken, on a case with a lot of journalists in Egypt being arrested, falsely accused of misinformation, terrorist organization, and so on. One particularly Sulafa Magdi. And I don't know if you had the chance to work with her or with some of the other journalists, or if your colleagues shared with you information, but what is your stance on journalists being falsely accused of misinformation when the information that they are publishing is, let's say, more controversial and going a bit against what the government is promoting? And if you have had in your career like an experience like this, or a colleague or friend of yours? Thank you.
Yes. Well, you know, depending on where you practice your profession, you may be subject to this kind of treatment, especially Al Jazeera, because it's pretty much the only free and independent voice out there. And a lot of people don't like that, you know, not only in those countries, but in the West too. I mean, so journalists, especially in these countries where people's rights are not often respected, it can be very dangerous to say certain things. But that's the job of the journalists. So of course, you know, they still do it despite reprisals. I've never worked, well, I'm independent. So basically I work alone, or I work with my colleague. And what I mainly do is do stories on organized crime, Cosa Nostra, 'Ndrangheta, and you know, that kind of thing. So I've never really been a correspondent in one of these places. I've known people who have, a lot of my colleagues have been maybe arrested or thrown in prison just because they were in the wrong place at the wrong time. The most that's happened to me is I've received letters saying I will sue you, or I've been threatened by people who say, you know, you better not say this, or you better not put this on video. And a lot of times it's not the crooks who say that, but it might be some big company that will tell you, look, you better not, you know, run this on TV because my lawyers will sue you. So that's my experience. Of course, if you go out and report on the war in Lebanon, last week I had a colleague who was thrown in prison there. They let him go afterwards. But I guess it's normal, you know, if you do that kind of reporting.
Hello, I'm Elena Trinteri, a student of global governance. And so we can say that now journalism is not only about telling the truth as it maybe was before, and it's being, we can say, maybe manipulated and also a little bit instrumentalized by politics. So my question is actually independent journalism the only way to get through this? And I think that independent journalism is for an elite audience, we can say, because now everyone is looking for and is watching the normal journalism. So like to actually know the truth about some mechanism, do we have only to look for independent journalists and editors?
No, I don't think so. I mean, independent journalism is, of course, very important because it's independent, you know, and you usually don't have somebody telling you what your story is going to be about. But if you wanted to know the truth about something, you have to read or watch a number of different, you know, sources. So a lot of times you may have to read different newspapers and then kind of find a balance between the stories. Some of them will be leaning on one side and some of them on the other, and you know, you kind of find an equilibrium there. to figure out what actually the truth might be. But there are still big media organizations that are, very, how might I say this, that go after the truth and because they use certain kinds of methods in their investigations. Not only Al Jazeera, you've got the BBC. I mean, there's quite a few of them that are trustworthy to a certain extent. Of course, if you even maybe the BBC, if you talk about something that's important for them, then it might be a little bit more difficult. The same is true with Al Jazeera. I mean, I've never done a story for Al Jazeera that talks about oil or stuff that they might be interested in, in a different sense. But yeah, I think that independent journalism is definitely a more truthful voice out there. But like I said, you have to watch and read as much material as possible if you want to figure out what the truth is about something. And if you're a journalist, it's a lot easier because after you read something and you have to tell that story, you just go out there and ask people directly, which is something that, a lot of people don't do nowadays. Because I have a lot of colleagues who work in newspapers, for example, here in Italy, and they tell me that they are told to fill like 2 pages in a day. So what they do is they take the news from ANSA or AP or Reuters, and they just copy and paste. And nobody goes out there and actually calls the people that are involved in the story or rings the doorbell of that person that may be the protagonist of the story to actually check. So what you have to do is obviously always double, triple, cross-check everything several times. That's how you manage to figure out what the truth is.
Hi, I'm Emma Minichello from Global Governance as well. And I was thinking about all these journalists that got called out for and got threatened like even more than hundreds times per year, like Travaglio, Ranucci. And like, how do you think that the world of journalism reacts, and especially how it should react to such threats that happen constantly?
Okay, now we're talking Italy again. Italy is a very particular reality because a lot of these people get threatened, but very seldom do these threats actually, become a real and concrete danger because there's a lot of, political competition. I think that the world of journalism should definitely take the side of any journalist that's threatened, any journalist that tries to tell the truth that's threatened. They should be backed by the world of journalism. Unfortunately, here in Italy, we have, for instance, the Ordine dei Giornalisti, which is an organization which is peculiar to Italy because it doesn't really exist anywhere else. But they don't really stand up for any of this, or they don't really say anything. I've been paying my registration to the this association of journalists for maybe over 20 years. But apart from just giving them some money and they put a little stamp on your journalist card, they don't really do anything else. So that's a bit lacking here in Italy, but it's also true that in Italy nowadays journalists are not living in such a dangerous place, like Egypt can be, or any other country where there is less of a rule of law. Up until the 80s, the 70s and the 80s, it was a lot more dangerous to operate here because journalists actually got killed very, very often. And, and we still don't know by who they were killed or why for the most part. So, but nowadays it's a bit different. I mean, I've told stories about the 'ndrangheta, I've named names, I've named companies, I've been looking for money around the world that's laundered by these organizations, and I'm still here. So yeah, I hope I answered your question.
I'm Cecilia Ramini from Global Governance, and I wanted to ask you which one do you prefer as a journalist when documenting between primary and secondary sources? And about secondary, you mentioned like the BBC and others, but which are the ones that you say they are reliable? Like I can surely trust them if there are
Okay, that's a tough question because it depends on, like I said, it depends on what they're talking about. But I think that Al Jazeera is very reliable. I like the BBC. In Italy, I don't know. I don't know. I tend to read a little bit of everything and try it. Like I said, if you want to get to the bottom of things, you're usually better off going to a prosecutor and getting the paperwork and reading that, and then forming your own opinion. But of course, if you're just a reader, you're not going to go out to a court and get the court papers and read thousands of pages of stuff just to understand where the truth might lie. So I think my favorite are Al Jazeera and the BBC. Channel 4 is okay too.
Okay, thank you so much. I have several questions. I hope you can answer to them. Okay, the first one is, what is the difference in approach when you have to produce a report for Al Jazeera, English in your case, compared to the one for a Western broadcaster? And which of the two might leave you more space to tell the truth? And this is the first question. And actually, I also wanted to ask, I don't know if you can answer, the main difference between Al Jazeera English and Arabic in the content of the news, since it's another language. And I've seen also with Wikipedia, for example, if you search the same information, example, Rome, in English and in Italian, it's completely different. Also, the main sentence at the beginning changes so much. So this is the first question. And the second one is, when a government changes in a sensitive political context, how does it affect your ability to work? And I'm talking about RAI, since I suppose you're Italian, and Al Jazeera. And especially, we talk now about Telemeloni. So, I mean, the government has changed and many people criticize this fact. This is the second question. And the third one is, in a case of attack that you were mentioning before, that you were threatened by someone because you might have understood something interesting, etc. Which are your rights as journalist, and how are you covered by your company? I mean, you're working for someone, so which is your protection? What are your rights? Thank you so much. Thank you.
I forgot what you asked to begin with. What was the first question?
The first one was the ability for you to say the truth in Al Jazeera compared to the Western broadcaster.
Okay. Okay, the ability to say the truth depends on you. Okay, because there are certain things that you might accept as far as changes go to the narration in your story, and others that you might not. So it's not a one-way process. I mean, when your editor says you need to change this and say this, I mean, you don't just take that and do it. You have to fight for what you want to say. And as far as I've seen, I mean, I've been pretty I mean, I've worked well with Al Jazeera because they've never insisted on making me change the story I was telling. As far as Rai, I don't know because I haven't worked enough with Rai. I know I have several colleagues that work in Rai, and of course, every time the government changes, they are given a new direction and told, well, now you have to do this story, that story. And this happens with every government, not just with Meloni. Of course, Meloni, you know, it's not, I guess a lot of journalists maybe don't find her very accommodating as far as you know, freedom of information and free speech, but it happens with every government. It's something that's Italian. It's not. It doesn't really belong to one side or the other. It's pretty much a bad habit that's shared by all of the parts. What was that last question? I'm sorry. Okay. When you're threatened, well, you know, in usually the threat for a journalist will be it's called libel, you know, so you'll be sued. What Al Jazeera usually does when you go through legal is they take the British standard because you know, they say that London is libel capital of the world. So if you won't get sued for something in London, it's very hard for you to get sued elsewhere. And then if you get sued in places that, you know, in some places you can get sued and you don't really care. I mean, you're not going to care if you get sued in Congo or in Uzbekistan because they're not going to come after you if you're living in Italy. So yeah, that's that's pretty much my answer. Is that okay? Thank you.
Hello, good morning. My name is Aisha, and I want to say, working in international journalism, I think you have faced many difficult situations in related to covering conflicts, cultural differences and the political realities of different countries. And my question is, what key lessons and skills learned in this work do you consider most important for journalists who focus on reporting inside their own countries? I mean, how does international experience help to better understand internal processes, and can it contribute to improving the quality of national journalism? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yes, having experience abroad is always helpful because, well, I grew up in Congo, in the previously called Zaire, you know, and then I was in the United States for maybe 5 or 6 years, and then I came back to Italy, and of course it helped me a lot, especially because I wasn't forced to work for an Italian media organization, but I can sell my work abroad, which is, but that's one side. That maybe that's not what you were asking exactly. I think that the main qualities that are helpful in relating to others, because that's what journalists do, on the one side is being nice to people, because I've obtained more by being nice to people, and they will talk to you instead of, you know, maybe stalking people or running after them, or, you know, being a nuisance. Usually when you're nice and when you understand people, they will be, you know, nice to you, and they'll tell you what you want to know. That's the main thing, I think, which has helped me in my personal experience as a journalist. Of course, everybody has a different method. And I think that living abroad or having grown up abroad has helped me in not feeling a little bit of an outsider, and which allows you to not be part of a group or take sides. because you see everything in a more reasoned and critical way, I think.
Hi, I'm Anna Maria Vitelli from Global Governance. Thank you for being here. I wanted to ask, when you do this kind of a job, generally you really need to be passionate about this. And I wanted to know what was the originating cause of you choosing to do this job, and if it was your first option, and so why you really do this? What was the origin of this research of the truth?
Okay.
Thank you.
I've always wanted to be a journalist. I mean, when I moved to Congo when I was like 7 years old, and began going to the American school there, and there was this little school newspaper. It was called the Condor Chronicles, and I began writing for them. You know, very simple stories about, you know, or fantasy stories that a kid might write. But since then, I've always had the passion for this job. And I think Italy has a wealth of mysteries that need to be solved. So it's very easy to do this job here because there isn't really a final truth on any story. I mean, right outside this window, you know, is where Aldo Moro's car was left here in Via Caetani. And we still don't know why. You know, and it was in 1978. So and there's hundreds of stories like that here in Italy, and you know, involving the murder of journalists, prosecutors, politicians, you know, regular people, and everything seems to be a big mystery. So there's a lot of material here, and it's very, very interesting, I think.
Sorry. I wanted to ask, in order to be a journalist, whether in Italy or outside of Italy, do you have, or it's, I mean, it's more easy to be a journalist if you attend to journalist schools, like, or you can study like international relations, or you're interested and then start writing?
Okay. Your course of studies doesn't really matter if you want to be a journalist. Go and knock on the door of some newspaper or a blog or whatever, and start doing this job. That's what matters the most, I think. I studied journalism, but here in Italy, it's not a proper university course of studies. It doesn't really exist. We have some schools in Perugia, Pino, but I don't think that you really need that at all. I mean, because the only way you're going to learn how to do this job is by going into a newsroom and figuring out how it works. It's not very, I mean, there isn't a lot of theory involved. Like I said, you have to be willing to break down that wall that you know, that's in every one of us, that kind of blocks you when you have to ask an uncomfortable question or speak to somebody that you don't know. If you get over that, and you know, you'll find the name, say in the court paper, for some mafia guy who's laundering money, and they usually have the address, the phone number. Pick up the phone, call him, go to the address, ring the bell, talk to the people. I mean, that's the main thing. And then, of course, you need to study, because if you're going to write or you're going to, you know, do video, you'll still need to figure out how things are narrated. And, you know, you need to know the language, of course.
Okay. I'm with Margherita, and I wanted to ask, so often I notice that on social media pages of important newspapers, now I'm specifically referring to the Italian case, the articles published on the social media pages are of such low quality, and sometimes they also show like discrepancies within the articles. For example, last time I was reading an article which was about a boy who was thrown in a river, and at the beginning of the article it said that it was 19 years old, and at the end it became 20 years old. I don't know how. So before you said that some of your colleagues have to copy and paste things because their bosses require 2 pages things. So this decreasing quality of articles on social media is something which is the result of this high demand for information by the public, or there are other factors at play? And how do you feel about that? I mean, of course, we have to double check and triple check, but as a journalist, I wouldn't feel, I don't know.
Well, you know, people make mistakes and it happens, but of course the exponential multiplication of sources or of you know, newspapers or blogs or articles is of course detrimental to the quality of journalism in a way, because a lot of the stuff that we read nowadays may have been created by some AI. Where I've also read pieces on national newspapers that I will find in the foreign press that have just been translated and published with a different name. So there's a lot of amateurish, you know, journalists out there, that's for sure. So you have to be a lot more selective nowadays because there's less of a filter. You get direct news from people who might talk about something that, whereas in the past they would have had to been working for a newspaper, now all they have to do is write it and just publish it on some social media, so you can access it. So in a way it's positive. And then on the other side, it's not, because the quality of the information has gone on, of course, on a descending, you know, parabola. Yeah.
So, hi, my name is Rebecca Pedone. I'm also a global governance student, and I wanted to ask what's your, what was the biggest case or the most interesting one that you have ever worked on?
Okay. The most interesting case that I've worked on is this documentary I did for Al Jazeera in 3 parts. I think it was aired about a couple of years ago about this guy. His name was Roberto Ricordare, and he's from Palmi in Calabria. And there was this report by the Palmi police that at one point became public because somebody at the court of Reggio Calabria had put it in a different case file. And so it was deposited, and that's how it works here in Italy. Once it's deposited, it becomes public. And inside this report, there were a bunch of wiretaps where this guy and his associates spoke of moving literally hundreds of billions of euros from China to Dubai to everywhere around the world. And what emerged from, I worked on this story for 2 years. Okay, so, and I went to South Africa, to Slovenia, Croatia, to Ukraine just a few months before the war started to figure out what was going on, because these guys were talking about secret accounts that were hidden in the, you know, more obscure folds of the financial system, and they were using these accounts in companies like shell companies to move money. And that was very, very interesting story, although I didn't manage to, you know, solve it in the end in some way. I mean, I did find that there was this big mechanism, this big financial mechanism with hundreds of companies and frontmen and, you know, but at one point, if you want to figure out whether money actually went from one place to the next, you're going to have to knock on the door of a bank. And when you do that, the bank will tell you, we can't talk to you because the privacy of our clients is the most important thing. So that's one thing that I was really angry about this because when you figure out that something very, very important or significant like this may have happened, you would want, even the bank to collaborate in finding out the truth. But there are some things that in the modern world, some barriers that you just cannot knock down unless you hack into the bank. But then you'd be committing a crime, so you can't really do that. But that was the most interesting story. It's called The Launderer. You can watch it on Al Jazeera if you look it up. Yeah.
Good morning. My name is Beatrice Gentile. I wanted to ask, to what extent the newspaper you work for has the exclusivity on everything you write, and if you ever written something independently while still working with a newspaper, and also if you have ever helped some other colleagues while working on a certain newspaper. I don't know if I explained myself.
Yeah, no, I understand.
Thank you.
Well, I've never really worked for a media organization on an exclusive basis, like I said. So if I'm producing something for Rai, that doesn't, matter. I mean, if I want to produce something for somebody else, I can do that. It's up to me because I'm independent. As far as the rights of what you produce, it depends on who you're selling the story to. As far as Al Jazeera is concerned, they take all the rights. I mean, you will give them a finished product and it's theirs. You can't sell it to somebody else afterwards. It depends on the news organization. Sometimes they may, just want to air it first, and then the rights will come back to you, but then you'll get less money. So it's like it's a market, And what I found very strange nowadays is I've read that, for instance, Corriere della Sera and Repubblica have just sold the rights to their archives to OpenAI. So that's something that I found very, very strange, because usually when you have a contract with a media organization, they buy the contents that you produce, but they don't buy your brain. So what happens with the archives of Repubblica and Corriere della Sera is that the work of journalists is being used to recreate an artificial intelligence that thinks and writes like those journalists, whereas those journalists never sold those rights to their employer. So what do we do about that? I was recently at a conference about AI and journalism, and that was one of the things they spoke of. I mean, things are getting very, very complicated nowadays for journalists, especially with this artificial intelligence stepping in.
Thank you very much also on the behalf of the Festival of Diplomacy, and thank you for being with us today.
Thank you all.
If guys, if you could return around 11:50, so we take our places and we start by 12 with the next event, so we also don't postpone the lunch break. Thank you.